Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Michael Bevern, Co-Managing Director for Sunterra Fund Services, a fund administration firm. Let's dive in. Michael, if you can share with us a brief insight into you, please.
Thanks, Alex. Michael Von Bevern. I am the Managing Director for Sunterra Global in North America. I run their fund administration business for Sunterra. We operate out of a few offices here in the U.S. I'm located in Short Hills, New Jersey, and I've been in fund admin about coming up 19 years. So I've been in a long time, seen a lot of cycles, worked with a lot of funds, worked with probably over 500 managers over those 19 years.
Perfect. So what's one mistake that you see private equity or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
Well, I do work with a lot of emerging managers, a lot of first-time managers. Um, and in general, they sort of follow the same path if they're not going to be successful. And that is usually sort of not trying to stay with industry standard terms. You know, when they try to launch their first fund, I see people try to get too creative when they come out of the gate with a new offering, with a new firm, because, they're trying to differentiate. However, most investors who have, the ability to allocate, to a lot of um, different managers in your particular space, whether it's say VC or buyout or growth equity, um, they want to be able to compare like to like really quickly. So when they look at, your firm versus everyone else, I tell people all the time, just make sure it's super obvious when they're looking at your documents. How do they get their money back? When should they expect to get it back? You know, Nothing too complicated with regards to the waterfall, nothing too complicated with regards to the terms. So, um, I would say in general, a consistent trend, yeah, are firms that, try to be too creative. Get creative on the second one, the third one. Stay with, standard terms on the first one.
Okay, and that's predominantly sits on them getting too creative on the waterfall to try and make themselves a little bit more attractive because capital raising is tough. Well, it's always hard, but it's specifically hard at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, capital raising is particularly hard at the moment. So again, I think especially when you're looking at institutional investors, much different story when you're sort of working with friends and family and what I'll call insider money. When you start to go beyond that to, you know, family offices and, multifamily offices and, endowments and pensions, and they don't know you the way your friends and family do, they need to be able to compare you in a way that's sort of like for like. So, um, I would suggest, going with if 2 and 20 is still the standard, then stay with 2 and 20. Make it obvious to how the distribution waterfall works. If you're going to make it complicated, make sure it's complicated in their favor and you can explain it.
Perfect. So, given your line of work as a fund administration firm, I'm no doubt that you'll be an advocate for the outsourcing of fund administration. But what's your perspective on why that is so important?
I think, being in for 19 years now, I've seen the evolution of, fund administration with regards to the various types of strategies. So when I first got into fund administration, it was really more of a hedge fund offering. You know, when I first launched my first fund administrator in 2016, my business plan really focused on around the fact that about 50% of all the private equity firms were still insourcing the work. And the and I felt like the main reason for that, and your audience could disagree, but at the time I felt like the main reason for that was there was this sort of inclusivity and trust that goes on within the private equity world amongst the deal team, which extends to the back office, the accounting and the operations people, the IR people, where what we do, is unique and should be sort of within our four walls. And so there was this sort of education that was going on and slow acceptance into, using an outsourced third party. And that to me started with trust, the same level of trust that you would have with the internal team, you needed to have with that external team. So, we focused, heavily on offering that to um, private equity firms with the combination of, you know, boutique, hands-on service, and at the time, you know, modern technology. So when you looked at it as far as, okay, I could source this in-house. Yes, I maintain full control over the team, the knowledge, um, and look at it compared to, outsourcing. Well, I still pick up a really quality team. I pick up software that potentially I may not be able to, afford myself, now using it on a fractional basis. And when you look at that combination, it's almost the same as if you were doing it in-house. And then the added benefit was fund administration is a cost of the fund versus a cost of the manager, which all the internal people are. So I don't have to say that anymore. Like that's not part of our pitch anymore because that's so widely known. But back in 2016, when I launched my first fund administrator, that was definitely part of the pitch. Today, people see it almost as table stakes to launch a fund. They generally go with a fund administrator. So 50% using fund administrators back in 2016, that number is probably up around 80%, today. So, yeah, but the industry in and of itself really hasn't changed that much. We still are a, collective of, good people who understand the strategy, providing, outsourced leverage technology, um, and, ultimately, provide you with that ability to grow on more of a sort of a, like a cloud basis where you launch a new fund tomorrow, you just let me know. And I say, great, I have the people who can handle that. You launch a new fund tomorrow and you talk to your internal team and they're already maxed out. Now you have to go hire another person and deal with, all of that HR related issues. Um, you don't deal with any of that when it comes to fund administration. Um, Vacations, maternity leaves, jury duties, that's all my problem. That is not the manager's problem anymore. And firms like mine who are sort of in your time zone, who are often dedicated teams, can look and feel just like an internal team. And so, you know, that's where I think we are today.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of a long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast. With regards to the fundamentals that are learned by people in fund administration, from working in search ourselves, we see quite a lot of people moved into the back office or moving or transferring into the back office of private equity firms. Why do you think that fund administration becomes a target for private equity to hire the people in those firms?
Yeah, in my experience, it always has been. There's been times where I've felt sort of like a farm system for managers and GPs over the years. Um, Teams like mine who are dedicated to each client. So I don't have a lot of utilitarian groups where I just have one person do this and one person do that. We basically function as one team does everything for every client. So by the time somebody, who maybe graduates university or college and starts to work with us, 2, 3 years later, they come out with a set of skills that include, you know, understanding the legal documents, understanding the tax implications, understanding the accounting, understanding the operations, and to some degree the strategies. So by the time you have that sort of breadth of knowledge, you're looking at potentially maybe 2, 3 people who have worked at bigger firms who have worked in one individual sort of silo of that versus somebody who's worked at a fund admin who has maybe not as deep of depth, but has depth nonetheless, and certainly has a breadth and of experience. So ultimately, I know managers are looking to hire as few people as they can in their back office, and fund admin, you know, folks, offer them that potential possibility. They could step into some IR roles, they could step into operational roles, some treasury roles, some accounting roles. Um, and, just their overall, skill set is just really strong. And so when I graduate a person, when I call it graduate a person out from here into a manager, it makes me feel great. And there have been situations over the years of 19 years of doing this where I have graduated people out of fund administration to the point where they run their own funds now and have selected me back as their fund administrator. So at one point, they worked for me, and now I worked for them. There is no better case study for me than that situation.
Excellent. So looking at the gold standard from a fund administration perspective, obviously there's different firms that offer fund administration services, but looking at that from a private equity lens, you've worked with different firms, you've seen different, you've seen, I'm sure you've seen the old classic of good, bad, and ugly. What are the things that you're seeing within private equity that you go, yeah, these guys are absolutely right at the top of the game from a fund administration perspective?
Well, I'd like to think that's us. Um, but in reality, it's hard to stay, at the gold standard in our business. It's changing, fairly rapidly. And fund administration as an industry changes relatively slowly. Um, but from a gold standard, I would say my number one requirement if I was looking at a fund administrator is access to data, good data, timely, right? So when I first started 19 years ago, um, it was a black box. Funds gave us their data, and then weeks/months later, we gave them back something that they were supposed to interpret and to determine whether this was accurate or not.
Mm.
Today, we're in constant daily contact with our funds. They can see their results on a daily basis. If they need accounting reports, they can get accounting reports. If they need, you know, deal and position level information, they can get that today. We're performing reconciliations to third parties on a more frequent basis. So that is the the current, sort of best practice to be able to give good, accurate data on a timely basis. Now the key is how do you make it more affordable? Um, and that's where the industry is trending now.
What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to that you should recommend that others check out, please?
Um, well, I do follow a number of newsletters. I'm a subscriber to a few. Some of them are free. I follow some of the standards like Preqin and PitchBook. I do follow a number of larger managers, um, either from, from a personal perspective, some, like Howard Marks, Oaktree, is somebody I follow. And um, I just really enjoy some of the content that I see on places like LinkedIn, for some of the groups that I follow. You know, um, we're part of ILPA, we're embracers of the ILPA standard. So I get involved with, their sort of initiatives. Um, and most importantly is we're out and about and we're in the New York City area. So there's constant events. We have a really great network of other service providers, whether it be accounting firms, law firms, valuation firms, placement agents, that keep us in the know. We like to collaborate a lot with those folks, to stay on top of what's going on. Um, yeah, so doing doing things like this is a great way for us to stay current. I mean, one of the sort of perceived downsides of fund administration is it's a little it's reactive to the market. So whereas a GP is at the market right now as they're doing deals, um, that is true, and we sort of see it sort of slightly after the fact on sort of a T+1 basis,
Okay.
and we're obviously not in the room when they're making the decision, portfolio company A versus for portfolio company B. We only see the result, that they picked one of the two. Um, but what we can, accumulate is a lot of data from a lot of funds and draw a lot of correlation between all of that to determine where we think the industry is at and where we think it's going. So, for example, we talked about fundraising before. You know, we have, I think, 5 or 6 new launches in our pipeline right now. People who are in the fundraising process, and the story is the same across all 5 of them.
Okay.
They have a target close, and ultimately they are struggling to get to that number. And can I tell you exactly why or what they're hearing from potential investors? No, I'm not in that room. But I could see that they're all struggling and all sort of going after the same, investor base. So there's something within the current investor base with regards to timing that is keeping people from committing. Um, It could be, just saturation from the market. I mean, we see the trend in the market where back in 21 and 22, there was an extreme amount of, new fund launches.
Hmm.
So, um, for 23 and 24, we saw, you know, much less new launch activity. And when we did see it, we saw it more in private credit than we saw in private equity. And, our assessment for why that was happening, um, was just sort of fatigue, with regards to all the funds that, were launched, right before that. And then ultimately it's sort of secular, s- s- and
Cyclical. Yeah. Yeah.
cyclical. Thank you. Appreciate that. Um, and, as managers, are trying to find investments for these funds, everything was just taking a little bit longer. So we actually see Q4 of 2025 into Q1 of 2026 to be a strong period, is our prediction, strong period for fundraising.
Okay.
Um, and, just based upon our data, that we're seeing.
Interesting. So if anybody wishes to reach out to you, Michael, how best do they get in touch, please?
Um, I am reachable from the Sunterra website, sunterra.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. Um, And, uh, yeah, if anybody direct messages me on LinkedIn, I always get back to them. If there's anything I can do to help, whether it's educate, um, or explain our specific services. The one thing I am excellent at is knowing where people might be a good fit in fund admin. Being that sort of one of the more veterans of the industry, I pretty much know every fund administrator out there.
Okay.
And there are definitely situations where I'll talk to people where we may not be the best fit. But I probably know somebody who is a good fit for you. Um, and I can definitely help, you know, steer you in that direction, make introductions. know lots of lawyers, know lots of bankers, know lots of accountants. Um, so potentially be a resource, that way as well, if ultimately, help you on the fund administration side.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for coming onto the Private Equity podcast today.
I appreciate it, Alex. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And as always, thank you very much for everybody for tuning in yet again to the Private Equity podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for listening.